Hi, this is NX from the Candid Frame. And before we get started, I want to just announce a couple of workshops that I've scheduled in the coming months. The first one is going to be held in November, and it's going to be held at the Los Angeles Center of Photography, formerly known as the Julia Dean Photo Workshops. And it's a course called The Art of Editing and Sequencing. And in this one-day course, what I do is I walk you through the process of editing a selection of images and culling it down into a really tight edit. So whether you're trying to build a portfolio, a gallery page on your website, or a book, I'm going to show you how to go through, dozens, if not hundreds of images and be able to edit them down into a sequence of images that not only make sense together, but there's a certain rhythm and a flow to the photographs. And that's something that I found in my experience that a lot of photographers never get to learn. So I've been doing this workshop over the last couple of years, and this will be the first time I'll be offering it this year. So check it out at the LACP website. And on February 27th, 28th, and March 1st of next year, I'll be teaching a street photography workshop with Valerie Jardin. And she and I are going to be taking you out into the streets of downtown Los Angeles and sharing each of our respective approaches to street photography. We do it very, very differently, but I think in a lot of ways we're very simpatico in terms of how we approach people and how we respond to the scenes that happen in front of us out in the street. So please check that out. You can go to ibarionx.net or thecandidframe.com, and you'll find links here on the link for workshops for both, and you can register from there. Today I'm going to show you Alien Skin Exposure 6, which is a really interesting plugin because what they've done is they've actually scanned a variety of films, not just only recent films, but really old film, and they've basically scanned it to the microscopic level. I mean, they're looking at not only color and tonality, but they're looking at grain structure, and the results are profiles that really closely match what the original films look like. They didn't just go in there and try to simulate it using code. These scans really give you representations that look like, well, that these shots were actually made on those films, and it's really a really cool software with respect to that. You'll find that a lot of other softwares have been incorporating this into their applications, but none as exhaustively as Exposure 6 has done. Now, when I consider using Exposure 6 for my black and white conversions, I'm not looking at it in the way that I've used the other two applications or even Adobe Lightroom. I see Exposure 6 as a sort of a finishing up, a way of polishing my images at the end, especially when I want to get a very specific look from my photographs, but I also want to save myself time and energy. So, for example, if I were shooting a wedding, I might shoot a lot of photographs, but I'm going to deliver to the client maybe a select of about 100, maybe 150 photographs. And I've agreed with them that I want to produce, a black and white collection of photographs. I don't want to have to go in there and have to individually process every single one of those 150 images to make them look a certain way. It just is not cost effective, and it's no fun. So what I tend to do is I like to try and use profiles and batch processing to sort of achieve that look within a fraction of a time, within a fraction of the time, but still get a good quality look. And you can do that to an extent in Adobe Lightroom, but not necessarily so with some of the other applications that I've shown you, except for Exposure 6. Now, what I tend to do now when I have that intent is, unlike the other two examples where I flatten the images and then bring them into the application to sort of optimize them for black and white, I will actually pre-process my images in Lightroom to get the best look possible. So I've shot these images in the street a couple of months back. They're not great photographs, but I'm not here to try and impress you with my photography. That's for another day and another time. But what I wanted to show you basically is that how I just will treat these images. And rather than going individually to all these photographs into the develop module and tweaking all these controls, I've already sort of done that and created a preset here. All these images that I'm going to show you today were shot with a Samsung camera. So I've created a default that when my images, are well exposed and the white balance is correct, I can hit this default, and all the images that I've shot with that camera will achieve the look that I'm going for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these 3 images here, and I'm going to bring them into exposure 6. Now I'm selecting the DNGs, and what's going to happen is when I go into edit exposure 6, it's going to ask whether or not I want to apply the presets to as part of my Lightroom adjustments, which I want to do. It's the only option that I have here. So I'm going to go ahead and click edit, and what it's going to do is it's going to apply all those presets, create TIFF duplicates of these images, and import those into exposure 6, because exposure 6 at least at this point is unable to take the actual DNG or RAW files in order to process it. Now if I'm only doing 3 images here, so having them done as TIFFs is fine. But if you're working with a batch number of images, say like 150, 100 or 200 images, you probably want to do all your adjustments in Lightroom and then create JPEGs, the much smaller files, and it will just mean that the your computer and the plugin won't have to work as hard as compared to working with JPEG TIFF files. So here we are in exposure 6, and we have the 3 images here. And now we can go actually into the presets here on the left-hand side, and you can take a look at all the different films that are available here. It's incredible how many different films they've made available to it. Now, you have a variety of different views here. You have these fairly large thumbnails on the left. You have the smaller thumbnail views. You have a list view if you don't want to see the thumbnails. And as you move through the different films, you'll see that your screen here will actually change, and does it pretty quickly, even though these are TIFF files. But the view that I kind of prefer is simply by moving the display window over to the right, I will actually see these enlarged thumbnails of all the images with the effects displayed right there. So I can look in here and I can actually make comparisons. And if I like a particular treatment, like saying here, I like this Agfa APX 100 and I want to save it as a favorite, all I have to do is go to the upper right hand corner where there's a little star and click on it, and now that will become part of my favorite listing. So what I can do is just go and view all the different films in there and just choose my favorites and get a sense of, okay, which ones do I want to use? Do I want a film treatment that is very high contrast, where it's been push processed? Do I want something that's sort of flat? There's virtually everything, and anything and everything is available to you. The great thing about this is that not only do they have sort of the kind of films that you expect, like Triax and Ilford and all these other things, but they also have black and white Polaroid film. They have black and white vintage films that are available. It's really kind of awesome, because if I want to get a look other than just a straight black and white conversion, I'm able to do that with this application. So you'll find practically everything that you need in here, especially if you want to get a real distinctive look, not only to wedding photographs, but to portraits, so on and so forth. So I'm going to go into my favorites, and I've had several here, and when I save in my favorites, they're still saved within the categories from which I pulled the original files. So here you have black and white films, black and white film Polaroid, some of my color favorites in terms of cinema profiles and vintage, but we're going to stick with black and white. And I want to play with something a little more extreme than I have before, and I wanted to check out these Polaroid, and I really like this Polaroid 55 with a vignette, and I thought it looked really kind of funky. So let's just play with that. If you want to do something more straight, you have the option to be able to do that, but I kind of like the look for this series. Now, once you've created that effect, you could just apply them to all the other images. But as with any application, you want to be able to customize it to your particular taste. So what you have here is basically the control windows of all these various controls that you're probably already familiar with. Here you have the basic control modes where you can actually adjust the exposure. You can move the sliders back and forth to brighten the image or to darken it in this case. With all these controls, you can actually hit your left and right key, and you can incrementally adjust the brightness, the contrast, the highlights, the shadows to your heart's content. So for right now, let's open up the shadows just a little bit. Okay, let's increase the clarity, because I think I really like the way the clarity makes these images look. There's not much in terms of color here, in terms of saturation, so you're not really going to see any changes here in terms of the last two controls for the most part. There may be some subtle changes, but nothing that really was of particular importance here. So you can tweak this here, but you'll find for the most part you probably won't do a whole lot if you've already optimized the image in Lightroom. The next control you have are the various color filters, and basically you look at these as filters that you put on your lens during shooting. You can create different degrees of contrast to your black and white images by just considering putting different filters on there. And depending on the color that existed in your original image, you'll see changes made to the shot. You'll find you also have very extensive control here with the color sensitivity controls. And here you can see not only similar changes to what you're using with the filters, but you can actually fine-tune it for specific colors in there. When you think about the color filter, you put in that filter in front of the lens and everything's affected equally. You can't isolate the change to specific color values or tonal values in this case. But you can with the color sensitivity. So you can adjust the red slider, and then anything that has the reds in it will do it. You can actually see that if you pay attention here to this woman, to her top and kind of her skin, you can see the difference that it's making there. Anything that it doesn't have any red in it is not being impacted at all by this. So if I wanted to darken that or anything with yellow or cyan or blues, you sort of get the picture. So if you want to fine tune that even further, that's always an invaluable tool. Then you have the tone curve, and I love the tone curve. But here, because I'm using this preset, it's already been tweaked for me, and I kind of like the look. But if I wanted to fine tune it, I'd have the ability to be able to do it. You have split toning available to you as well. I don't use it very often. I may apply a slight sepia tone, but if you favor that, you can customize that. And then here you have, of course, the border and the vignette. And let's for demonstration, let's add a lighting effect to this. So here I have a lighting effect that's created at the lower right-hand corner. But let's say it doesn't make any sense having a light lead coming down from the ground. I can see here that the light is coming from the left-hand side. It's coming from south on Broadway, so it makes more sense to have the lighting effect there. So what I can do is I can use just these controls here to flip it horizontally and then vertically. And it makes a lot more sense there, but it's still a bit too strong. And then I can adjust just the opacity to make it a little more subtle. I also have the ability of applying textures. They have a nice selection of different paper, scratch, and dust textures here. The great thing about the application is that you can import your own. But let's for the sake, let's go ahead and apply this paper texture. And again, I'm able to adjust the opacity about how strong or how weak it's going to be. I'm going to be just slightly here. Okay, and that looks really, really good. You can actually apply some sharpening techniques, and you may want to be able to do that a little because this is really kind of the final step. This is going to be primarily your output sharpening. I prefer to do it in Lightroom, but if this is going to be your final step before you actually produce the JPEGs that you're going to send out for the purposes of printing them or in a book, you may well enjoy doing it in here. The controls are just as powerful and just as flexible as you would find in Lightroom. Now, and you also have the ability to add grain, but you find that mostly you're not going to be adding grain, but you're going to be sort of maybe customizing the look of the grain, because all the films here are going to possess a certain level of grain anyway. So you'll find that more than likely you're just going to be refining it a bit. Now, one of the cool things about this application is they've incorporated what was a separate product into this. And let me close some of these windows here. And it is this effect called bokeh or bokeh. This is a feature of this, which was once its own standalone application, because now you're able to control the degree of sharpness for your foreground and your background. So it's really, really cool. So for example, if I wanted to create a bokeh effect where this background is out of focus, but the figures here are in focus, what I can do is I can delete the default, which is sort of this circular effect here, and you'll see that it has a very strong defined circle here and then one with dashed lines on the edges. This is the area that would remain sharp, and this area here, as it transitions further and further, is the area of softness created by the bokeh effect. So here it starts feathering until by the time it reaches the dashed line, it is going to be the full effect of the bokeh. But I want to delete the circular one, and I want to create this one using these lines. So here's the center point. This is the area where it's going to be the sharpest. So I want to keep that on my subjects here, but by moving in the dashed lines a little closer, I can actually create the bokeh effect so that the areas transitioning from here down to here are soft. So what I can do now is I will increase the amount of bokeh, amount of blur, and you can see it's a whole lot. So I'm going to do that. This is more than I probably want, but I just want to get an idea of where I want the effect to be. Okay, so I want their faces sharp, so I'm going to bring this up. And bring this down a bit. Okay. So that looks about good to me. So I'm going to reduce the amount, and it's pretty subtle. I'm bringing it down to about just a value of about 2 or 5. So if I want to see the mask, I can actually click on this button over here, and you can see the area where it applies, where it feathers out, and actually goes into complete black. So I haven't played a lot with this particular feature, so there's some extensive controls here, but just sort of get the picture. So what I can do now is I like the overall look of the image here, and what I can now do is I'll go over here to the plus sign and create a new preset. So what I want to call this is Polaroid Vignette with bokeh, and it will save it in my existing black and white Polaroid, or I can create a whole new folder if I wanted to, but for right now we'll leave it there, and I can write a description if I need it, and then I'll hit OK. So this is my before and this is my after. So this is the look that I've gotten. I really kind of like the look, but I have these other two images in here that don't have the benefit of that. So what I can do is I can highlight those two and then simply hit that preset, and now all three images have the benefit of all those changes that I made to the first shot. And then the cool thing is I can always fine-tune it. If I don't like the way that the bokeh effect or any of the other changes I've made, I can tweak them. But the whole purpose of this is to try to make all of this, well, as efficient as possible, because I don't want to have to spend a lot of time having to do this individually. So you can imagine how this would be in any other plugin, how time-consuming it could be. So now all I have to do is hit apply, and it will take that effect and then apply them to the TIFF files. and you'll see them come up in Lightroom. And now we're back in Lightroom, and now we can see the results for the 3 images that we processed. So it's amazing what I'm able to do within such a short period of time, especially to a large number of images. And I think that's the underlying strength of this application. Yeah, it's got some really distinctive looks that it can provide you because of all the scanning they've done for all these films, but its real power is this tool to batch process. Anyone who has to do editing and processing a number of images, can immediately knows the benefit of such an application. You don't necessarily have to be using it that way in order to take advantage of the strengths that this application certainly has. It's an easy way to really get a real distinctive look that's rooted in traditional film photography. I know a lot of people out there are shooting film because they feel like they can only get that look from shooting film. But for those of us who really aren't interested in shooting film but still want to get a look, well, Exposure 6 is definitely a tool that you should consider. And with all the applications and the processes that I've shown you over the last couple of weeks, I really can't say definitively that there's just one that you should get. I think based on your own needs, you'll kind of determine which one fits your needs. Personally, I find myself using all of these at some point or other. They all have their strengths, and they all have things that really make them really, really unique. But hopefully these tutorials or these videos that I've done will give you a sense of which of these 3 will work for you. Some of you may want to just stick with Adobe Lightroom, while others of you may want to invest in 1, 2, or maybe all of these different plugins. Regardless of what you choose, I think you'll find that you'll have so much flexibility and so much fun just playing with your images. So I hope you've enjoyed this series that I've done. And if you haven't checked us out at thecandidframe.com, please do so. And I have over 248 interviews currently where you can hear about not tech, not gear, but about creativity from some of the world's best photographers. So thanks for joining me again, and I will see you next time.